Deprived of the 7 flavors and the 3 essences. The 3 essences are a power of the earth, the power of the law, and the power of human life and society. All depressed, dejected, and impotent. This sounds terrible, doesn't it? But equally, we know it can happen. We've seen this sort of situation in small areas. We know it can happen. We know it can happen to us. How much that vibrant practice of Gongyo is required, isn't it? To more and more and more people to activate their life force in the midst of the sea of negativity, despair and destructiveness in which we sometimes find ourselves. Then a little further down, all the mountains will be swept by fire, and the heavenly dragons will no longer send down rain. This came very close to us 2 years ago at our centre at Treats. Tens of thousands of hectares of land were destroyed by fire in the south of France because the weather was unusually hot and dry, and this fire came to within only perhaps 100 yards, 150 yards of our centre, of the actual building in which the Causton for Europe is enshrined. Very vivid this was to those young men from Europe who were there at that time. And worse still, later, through investigation, the police and fire brigade reached the conclusion that it had been started by a person, an incendiary, in other words. This madman, so twisted and distorted inside that perhaps for reasons of revenge on somebody, he destroyed, I think it was 23,000 hectares of land. When I say destroyed, anyway, destroyed for quite a few years. And then 2E, dust will rain down until all is darkness, and the sun and the moon no longer shed their light. We know the volcano that erupted in Washington spread its ashes for thousands of miles. They appeared and descended in the form of rain and mist and so on. The radiation from nuclear testing falls unseen like a horrible rain. We'll think no more of fathers and mothers than does the roe deer, a little further down, nearly at the bottom. We all understand the decline in the family unit, failure to look after the old, and sometimes the young. Especially, I think, in the United Kingdom, this is a problem. And finally, near the end of that extract that was read out, the wicked rulers and monks who perform these 10 kinds of evil behavior will destroy the true law of the Buddha and make it impossible for sentient beings to be born in the humanly and heavenly states of existence. The wicked priests and monks. Of course, this is talking about Buddhists in Japan at that time. Some of us get a bit upset sometimes with Nichiren Daishonin. In our hearts we think he's too strong. Somebody even said to me one day, it seems to me that Nichiren Daishonin's really slandering people himself by talking in these terms, by saying such dreadful things about other priests and monks. So, of course, what Nichiren Daishonin was doing was denouncing the slanderers, not slandering himself. He was denouncing the slanderers in order to try to turn them along the proper path and save them from ending up in hell and bringing everyone else into hell with him. Always Nichiren Daishonin succeeded in debate. Always, when he was challenged, he was able to win. Sounds like an unseasonable storm. Always when he was challenged, he won. Until in the end, the priests of the other sects deliberately avoided debate with him because they knew they were going to lose. And they wished to cling to their power. In denouncing slanderers of the true law, he was following exactly also what Shakyamuni had taught himself. I'd just like to read you from the Gosho Admonitions Against Slander. In the Nirvana Sutra, Shakyamuni stated, if even a good priest sees someone slandering the law and disregards him, failing to reproach him, to oust him, or punish him for his offense, then that priest is betraying Buddhism. But if he takes the slanderer severely to task, drives him off or punishes him, then he is my disciple and one who truly understands my teachings. Never forget this admonition against ignoring another's slander of Buddhism. Both master and disciple will surely fall into hell if they see enemies of the Lotus Sutra and fail to reproach them. To seek enlightenment without repudiating slander is as futile as trying to find water in the midst of fire or fire in the midst of water. To repudiate slander is jihi, Buddhist mercy. If one fails to do so, you are merely letting that person follow along his path to hell and misery and probably bring all sorts of other people with them. So let's have a break for just 5 minutes or so to stretch ourselves, and then we'll have the last run through for half an hour. Okay, thank you very much. We'll now, in the next 20 minutes or so, complete the lecture. And we've reached the top of the left-hand column on page 11, where it starts, the Ninno Sutra states. So you may find these next paragraphs in some areas a bit repetitious, but even so, I think we should read them all through, though I will not highlight more than a couple of paragraphs or a couple of sections in each of these extracts from the sutras. So I'll ask Robert now to carry on reading.
The Ninno Sutra states, when a nation becomes disordered, it is the evil spirits which first show signs of rampancy. Because these spirits become rampant, all the people of the nation become disordered. Bandits come to plunder the country, and the common people face annihilation. The ruler, the high ministers, the heir apparent, and the other princes and government officials all quarrel with each other over right and wrong. Heaven and earth manifest prodigies and strange occurrences. The 28 constellations, the stars in their orbits, and the sun and the moon appear at irregular times and in irregular positions, and numerous outlaws rise up. The same sutra also states, when I look at the 3 ages of past, present and future with the 5 types of eyes, I see that all the rulers of the nations were able to attain the position of emperor or king because in past existences they served 500 Buddhas. And this is the reason that all the various sages and arahats are born in their nations and are assisting them to gain great benefits. But if a time should come when the good fortune of these rulers runs out, then all the sages will abandon them and depart. And once the sages have departed, then the 7 disasters are certain to arise. The Yokushi Sutra states, if disasters and calamities should befall the members of the ruling Kshatriya class and anointed kings, such disasters would be as follows: the calamity of disease and pestilence among the populace, the calamity of invasion and plunder from foreign lands, the calamity of revolt within one's own domain, the calamity of irregularities and strange occurrences among the stars and constellations, the calamity of eclipses of the sun and moon, the calamity of unseasonable wind and rain, and the calamity of rain that fails to fall even when the season for it has come and gone. In the Nino Sutra, the Buddha addresses King Prasenajit in these words: "Great King, the region where my teachings now hold sway consists of 100 billion Sumeru worlds with 100 billion suns and moons. Each of these Sumeru worlds comprises 4 great empires. In the empire of the south, which is Jambudvipa, there are 16 great nations, 500 medium-sized nations, and 10,000 small nations. In these nations there are 7 types of fearful calamities that may occur. All the rulers of these nations agree that these are indeed calamities. What then are these calamities? When the sun and moon depart from their regular courses, when the seasons come in the wrong order, when a red sun or a black sun appears, when 2, 3, 4 or 5 suns appear at the same time, when the sun is eclipsed and loses its light, or when 1, 2, 3, 4 or 5 coronas appear around the sun, this is the first calamity. When the 28 constellations do not move in their regular courses, when the metal star, the broom star, the wheel star, the demon star, the fire star, the water star, the wind star, the ladle star, the southern dipper, the northern dipper, the great stars of the 5 garrisons, and all the many stars that govern the ruler, the 3 high ministers and the 100 other officials, when each of these stars manifests some peculiar behaviour, this is the second calamity. When huge fires consume the nation, and the people are all burned to death, or when there are outbreaks of demon fire, dragon fire, heavenly fire, mountain god fire, human fire, tree fire or bandit fire, when these prodigies appears, this is the third calamity. When huge floods drown the population, when the seasons come out of order and there is rain in winter, snow in summer, thunder and lightning in the winter season, and ice, frost and hail in the 6th month, when red, black or green rain falls, when mountains of dirt and stones come raining down, or when it rains dust, sand or gravel, when the rivers and streams run backward, when mountains are afloat and boulders are washed away, when freakish happenings of this kind occur, this is the fourth calamity. When huge winds blow the people to their deaths, and the lands, the mountains and rivers and the trees and forests are all at one time wiped out, when great winds come out of season, or when black winds, red winds, green winds, heavenly winds, earthly winds, fire winds and water winds blow, when prodigies of this kind occur, this is the 5th calamity. When heaven and earth and the whole country are stricken by terrible heat, so that the air seems to be on fire, when the 100 plants perish of drought and the 5 grains cease to grow, when the earth is red and scorched and the inhabitants are all wiped out, when prodigies of this kind occur, this is the 6th calamity. When enemies rise up on all 4 sides and invade the nation, when rebels appear both within the ruler's family and without, when there are fire bandits, water bandits, wind bandits and devil bandits, and the population is subjected to devastation and disorder, and fighting and plundering break out everywhere, when prodigies of this type occur, this is the 7th calamity. The Daijuku Sutra says, though the ruler of the state may have for countless existences in the past practiced the giving of alms, observed the precepts, and abided by the principles of wisdom, if he sees that my law, the Dharma of the Buddha, is in danger of perishing, and stands idly by without doing anything to protect it, then all the inestimable store of good causes that he has accumulated through the practices just mentioned will be entirely wiped out, and his country will become the scene of 3 inauspicious occurrences. The first is high grain prices, the second is warfare, and the third is pestilence. All the benevolent deities will abandon the country and take their leave, and although the king may issue commands, the people will not obey them. The country will be constantly invaded and vexed by neighbouring nations. Violent fires will rage out of control, evil winds and rains will abound, the waters will swell and overflow, and the inhabitants will be blown about by winds or swept away by floods. The paternal and maternal relatives of the ruler will join in plotting revolt. Before long, the ruler will fall gravely ill, and after his life has come to an end, he will be reborn in one of the major hells. And the same fate will befall the ruler's consort, his heir, the great ministers of the state, the lords of cities, the village heads and generals, the magistrates of districts, and the government officials.
Fantastic. Well done. Give him a clap. Thank you very much. As I say, there is, of course, an overlapping and repetition in these various quotations from different sutras. This particular section, though, as you can see, is veering very much towards the situation or position of the ruler of the country in the midst of all this chaos. And you remember in rather a hurt way, at the beginning, the questioner, the visitor, who is in fact the regent, Hojo, is saying, you know, what's all this to do with me? I feel as much, you know, pain about all this as the people do. But in these particular quotations here, Nichiren Daishonin really begins to pin grave responsibility for this situation on the rulers themselves. So, also, in this particular section, he moves on from what are known theoretically as the 3 calamities to the 7 disasters. So, there is, again, a lot of overlapping between the 3 calamities and 7 disasters in various sutras. But the 7 disasters are listed quite clearly in this particular section from the Yakushi Sutra at the bottom of the left-hand column, page 11. Such disasters will be as follows: the calamity of disease and pestilence among the populace, the calamity of invasion and plunder from foreign lands, the calamity of revolt within one's own domain, the calamity of irregularities and strange occurrences among the stars and constellations, the calamity of eclipses of the sun and moon, the calamity of unseasonable wind and rain, and the calamity of rain that fails to fall even when the season for it has come and gone. At that particular time, all of the 7 disasters except one had occurred in Japan. In the 40 years from the time just before Nichiren Daishonin was born onwards, every possible disaster that one can imagine had happened, except one, number 2, invasion and plunder from foreign lands. So it was perfectly reasonable, and in no sense in the form of some sort of wizard or magician, that Nichiren Daishonin was able to tell the government of Japan that without fail, unless they mended their ways and followed the true teaching of the Lotus Sutra, inevitably that disaster of invasion and plunder from foreign lands was bound to occur. And as you know, his prediction came true with the Mongol invasions. So this was a perfectly logical statement in the light of the Buddhist understanding of the workings of cause and effect. For this is, of course, what the 3 calamities and 7 disasters are based on. Over the page 13, at the bottom of the left-hand column, it says, when enemies rise up on all 4 sides and invade the nation, when rebels appear both within the ruler's family and without, when there are fire bandits, water bandits, wind bandits, and devil bandits, and the population is subject to devastation and disorder, and fighting and plundering break out everywhere, when prodigies of this type occur, this is the 7th calamity. So, of course, today, the world as a whole is experiencing all of these 7 calamities in one form or another. What we want to make sure about is that these calamities don't begin to affect the whole of this earth. It started, of course, in the case of inflation. Inflation through shortages of raw materials. But we don't want it to extend to graver or more fearful disasters, and particularly to a global war. This, of course, is what our great movement, Kosen Rufu, step by step, is determined to make sure doesn't happen. So I'll ask Paul now just to read the last few lines. Sorry.
The passages I have quoted from these 4 sutras are perfectly clear. What person in 10,000 could possibly doubt their meaning? And yet those who are blind and sightless, those who are deluded and misled, trust to heretical doctrines and fail to understand the correct teachings. Therefore, throughout the empire these days, people are inclined to turn away from the Buddhas and the sutras and no longer endeavour to guard and protect them. In turn, the benevolent deities and sages abandon the nation and leave their accustomed places. As a result, demons and heretical doctrines create disaster and inflict calamity upon the populace.
Thank you. So, I'd like to read you at this point a few more extracts from President Ikeda's speech when he was with the German members last week. We have a right to live happily on this earth. We have a right to live in peace. We have a right to live in freedom. We have discovered the source through which to achieve these qualities in Nichiren Daishonin's Buddhism. The human being is the original point. Fundamentally, all that matters is human life. Life is the most precious thing. Nichiren Shoshu Soka Gakkai is advancing towards peace through the process of solving and clearing up all the problems of life. Just as the sun illuminates, warms, and brings happiness to the people, so Nichiren Daishonin's Buddhism, like the sun, can bring happiness to the people. Nichiren Daishonin's is the Buddhism of the sun. The great mother river Rhine starts as one drop in the Alps. Likewise, our gathering today is maybe still a very tiny nucleus, but 30, 50, or 100 years later this day will become great and memorable. This day is to create a current of peace of Kosen Rufu. A Greek writer called Nikos Kazantzakis talked about the doors of heaven and the doors of hell being next door to each other. For sure we want a happy life. It's awful to be unhappy. In previous ages it was said that one could only be happy believing in God. Time passed, and then rationalism and belief in materialism was thought to be the way to happiness. But still the current of history moves on, and now we live in a time where all values have apparently been lost, and people feel tossed about without any reference point. We have never lived in an age in history that has been so chaotic. So a clear and sure principle is vitally required so that we may know which door leads to happiness and which door leads to hell. We have discovered the door to create eternal and universal happiness through the practice of Nichiren Shoshu. We devote ourselves to the Daigo Honzon, which embodies the universal law. By so doing, we are proving this law in our lives. The prime point of Nichiren Shoshu is the Daigo Honzon housed in the Shohondo in Taisekiji. Nichiren Daishonin's teaching of Nam-myoho Renge Kyo is the great law to establish eternal life, the Buddha state, which is unshakable and indestructible happiness. This is called Jobutsu. Daishonin's teaching of Nam-myoho Renge Kyo for the latter day of the law means that every single human being can establish Jobutsu, which is eternal life in the Buddha state. That is opening up an indestructible state of happiness. Nichiren Shoshu Soka Gakkai is one step forward towards the 10,000-year period of Kosen Rufu through the law of Nam-myoho Renge Kyo. And he then went on to talk just a little about youth. And I think it's quite moving. This year in Japan is called the Year of Youth. I am pleased and surprised that there is such an excellent youth movement in Germany. I was a youth in my 20s when we began to build the Soka Gakkai after the ruins of the Second World War. At that time, there was only a handful of youths in the Soka Gakkai. Some went taiten. Only a handful continued. The youths who stayed in the Gakkai under the guidance of President Toda promoted Kosen Rufu widely in Japan. Of course, there were difficulties and obstacles. We expected them and surmounted them. Today, the foundation of Kosen Rufu is unshakable, and we can say that this great Buddhism is expanding throughout the world. I wish sincerely that the youth of Germany will stand up and contribute significantly to the peace, culture, and prosperity of Germany. Here lies the highest way of life, the springtime of life. In Buddhism, so-called sacrifice does not exist. By the law of causality, everything must manifest as one's own fortune and virtue. I'd like you to know that great power appeared from a handful of youthful comrades in Japan after the war. For instance, one of them is now President Hojo. Another is the General Director, Mr. Morita. They discovered their mission and used it as a springboard. In those days, we didn't have money. We were hungry. I personally was weak in body, but we completed the song of victory of faith. I sincerely hope that you, the youth of Germany, will show and prove how great this faith is. So at the end of next week, we start European summer course. President Keda will be at the center of that course. And without a shadow of doubt, I believe, it will be the launching pad for our activities over the next 20 years until 2002, 750th anniversary of the declaration of Nam-myoho Renge Kyo. And as you know, our motto, so far as the UK is concerned, for this course is all for one and one for all. So whether you're going or whether you're not, please be there in your heart. And those who go, bring back everything, all the realizations and the spirit that is gained to your own districts and groups. Let's make the discussion meeting in this coming month of June the very best discussion meeting that we've ever had in our districts. The theme for this discussion meeting is the theme of European summer course, faith. You'll get papers with the details on in due course. So when your members in the districts come back from summer course, they should be able to contribute tremendously to that discussion meeting. As I say, the subject is faith, and there are three headings: under that. Perseverance, correct practice, and the lifeblood of our heritage, which is, of course, Nam-myoho Renge-kyo. So, really, I ask you to make this discussion meeting great. Make this discussion meeting this June the symbol, if you like, for what you would like to see your discussion meetings like for the next 20 years. I don't mean the same content, but to be really great. The spirit of this meeting should be the spirit that will take us through to 2002. Also, as you know, we have a total of 200 Japanese members coming to visit us. 50 before summer course begins, the end of next week, and 150 after summer course has been concluded. And we want to make the 14th of June, which has been earmarked as Kosen Rufu Gongyo, a real festival of joy and happiness with these members. I really want us this time to welcome them hugely, really with our whole hearts. I believe this time, as has been the case before, these members, many of them are early pioneers, some of them quite elderly. It's through their incredible effort that we have the Gohonzon in our homes. Without that effort on the part of those members, none of us would have the Gohonzon today. This is the reality and the truth. And I believe by thanking them with our whole hearts, we can also thank the presidents of the Soka Gakkai, Mr. Makiguchi, Mr. Toda, Sensei, Mr. Hojo, and all the high priests going back 700 years to Nichiren Daishonin himself. This, I believe, then can be our launching pad for the next 20 years, this coming month of June. So, if we've already not started, let's chant for our districts, for the success of our meeting, that we can give the Japanese members a great welcome. And the summer course is going to be a great success, and that the weather will be fine when the Japanese members are here. They brought us the Gohonzon, which is treasure. And they too have brought Japan out of the ruins to what it is today. It's an interesting reflection, isn't it, that when the RISSHO ANKOKU RON was written, Japan was devastated. And in 1945, when Mr. Toda came out of prison, Japan was even more devastated, perhaps. Yet today, Japan and its people are vigorous, prosperous, and healthy. What do you think has done this? Of course, I'm not saying that we agree with all the policies of Japan, but what has produced this in Japan? The Japanese nation doesn't know it, but what has produced it is the billions and billions and billions of daimoku that have been chanted since 1945 by the members of the Soka Gakkai. Nothing else but that. One day, the Japanese nation as a whole will realize this. At the moment, they don't. But we should realize it, and I really hope we express our feelings and our gratitude to the Japanese members, and that in doing that, we feel too what we can create in this country of ours, in these really amazingly beautiful islands, what we can create 20, 30, 50 or 100 years from now. Don't you agree? Thank you very much indeed. Many thanks. Thank you. Thank you very much. Okay, we'll just ask Robert to put his Omamori Gohonzon up there, and we'll do a final sansho. Thank you very much.